First order of business. Did everybody read the minutes from last session?
I apologize for the late.
June 17th. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda minutes from June 17th?
Motion to approve the agenda?
Seconded.
All those in favor of approving the agenda from June 17th, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, let's move on. So,
Motion to approve the minutes from June 17th, 2019.
did I say that incorrectly?
You skipped over. I'm just trying to cover.
Minutes from June 17th, that's what I just said, isn't it?
I did the agenda first.
Oh, the agenda, I meant June 17th. So, yes, I skipped them, I did them in the wrong order. So, let's do the agenda.
No,
So-
we did the agenda. The agenda's all set. We need to do
I
the
said
minutes.
agenda from June 17th, so I'm sorry I confused everybody.
Okay.
That was for the agenda, is everybody okay with that? Okay, now we'll move on to the approval of the open session minutes from June 17th. Did everybody get a chance to read them?
Yes.
And do I hear a motion to approve?
Motion to approve
Okay,
open
now
session
can I get a
minutes.
second?
June 17th.
Second.
And can I get a vote to approve? Everybody that approves, say aye. Okay,
Aye.
good. All right, are we clear now?
We're clear.
All right, excellent. So, next on the agenda, community comments. We have quite a few people. Any comments from the community? Please come up if you have any comments.
I just have one question.
Yep, go ahead.
Is this the only time that's allowed comments, or are we allowed at the end as well?
This is the time during the meeting that you can speak.
So if
This
we
is
hear
comments.
something and we have a comment, we have to wait till the next one to make the comment?
Yes.
Okay, no, I'm just wondering, I haven't been to more than once.
No, I'm trying to think through my brain because this is my first session in this role. So
Oh, okay,
please forgive me.
no, that's fine.
But yeah, if you have community comment, come on, please come on.
I just want to say hello from the CPAC. We're going to make an effort to attend more of the meetings this year. Sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to the superintendent's comments.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back. It was a long summer, to say the least, 10 full weeks. First order of business is per policy JFBB, which is school choice, and also Mass General Law, Chapter 76, Section 12B. We are required, with regard to do 2 public announcings of school choice openings. The very first one we did before the conclusion of the school year, June 3rd, and then we take a look at enrollment variations as they play out. It's pretty much status quo. However, in consultation with the principals, there is 1 additional opening of school choice in grade 1 at Clough and 1 additional opening in grade 5 at MISCO. And those are the only reported changes. Second piece of business, just for your information purposes, and I put some background notes from DESE. Our commissioner, Jeff Riley, unveiled during the summertime something known as Project Kaleidoscope, which is something that he and the department are super excited about. Technically, the full name is the Kaleidoscope Collective for Learning. And it's something that he is going to be offering school districts and individual schools across the Commonwealth during this fall. And it's basically an opportunity for districts that really want to push teaching and learning, and specifically assessment strategies, in a more holistic manner, to come together as a cohort and create these performance-based assessments that are closely aligned with appropriate state standards. His ultimate vision is to have a system in place that would act as an alternative to MCAS. So if you could picture this, having a system of performance-based tasks, many of which would be done in a group setting as an alternative to the traditional standard MCAS tests. He is super enthusiastic about it, very excited about it. Both at the superintendent's and the principal's conference. He gave a great deal of attention to it. So for informational purposes, I filed a letter of intent saying that we would be interested upon more information in applying to be part of this pilot program. We're anticipating probably sometime in October the full application to be a member of the pilot and to look at the type of work that's ongoing in the district and the district's capacity. It's going to be part of the application. But I share that with you for information purposes. Okay. And then also this summer we got the terrific news in July that we received a grant for the amount of $28,760 to upgrade our security camera system at Misco Hill Middle School. As I think we mentioned back in March when we applied for the grant is one-time funds that came from the surplus funds from the state's FY 2018 budget that I know Governor Baker was very instrumental in releasing. So if you think about it, and if you've been in the main office here at the high school, we're going to have a comparable system that you see here at the high school at Misco Hill. It is a major upgrade. We are going from a total of 9 cameras at Misco to 50, and a brand new digitized DVR system and a brand new monitor in the office as well. I'd really like to express my thanks and give props to Jay Beyer, who was really instrumental in pursuing this, along with our school resource officer, Steve Senko from Mendon. So kudos to you guys. And then last but not least, speaking of the state and the state budget, just as a FYI, I know all throughout the spring process we were talking about how we came out with the state budget, and ultimately I believe we had a shortfall, I think it was of $282,000 for the FY 2020 budget. As the summer played out, things went both ways as far as additions and subtractions, as far as people leaving the district, but then additional needs coming up. But I do want to share with you, I believe in your packet are the final FY 2020 cherry sheets, which detail the final allocations. Unfortunately, Chapter 70 remained absolutely status quo, as it was through the House and the Senate budget, where we received the bare minimum, the hold harmless amount of $30 per student, which translated to $66,030 over our FY19 allocation. The regional transportation reimbursement was finalized at the Senate's established 80% reimbursement rate, and in recalibrating or re-estimating what that comes out on our FY 2020 cherry sheet, it is a grand total of $1,145,848, which is $26,510 more than our FY19 allocation. But in what we projected, it's about $50,766 more. So it was very, very challenging, as I say in my background notes, because the budget literally was not finalized until the first of this current month. So that makes things obviously a challenge. The challenge continues for FY 2020, and Jay will be speaking about that a little bit longer in a few minutes when he discusses how we closed out FY 19. Okay? Any questions on any of that? Thank you.
Okay, so next, administrators' comments. First up, we have Joseph Licue.
So Joe is here tonight. Our IT department was extremely busy over the summer with 2 major undertakings. First, PowerSchool, which is our new student information system, which in my humble opinion is a dramatic upgrade over iPass, which had really become dated, and there had become a lot of technological issues with it. And then also our new website, which is known as Aptigee. So Take it away, Jeff.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, everybody. Hope you had a good summer. I think the last time I was here, I was talking to you a little bit about we were going to be looking at going to another SIS system, and I think that was back in the fall of last year. Fast forward to today, we picked a product. We ended up going with a product called PowerSchool, which is a national company. They're based out of California, but locally used around here. You may have seen it in other districts, or heard somebody talking about it. To kind of recap how we got here, our existing product, iPass, just is starting to show its age. It's been very temperamental as far as things that we were looking for updates on the product. The company was acquired by another company. We started to kind of see the writing on the wall that we were, should be probably looking around for something else. We spent most of January and February interviewing companies, going kind of out on a mini RFP on what we could seemingly find out there in the market. After a lot of meetings and a lot of discussion, we ended up kind of settling on PowerSchool. We awarded them the contract in March, and we've been working with them since then to get it up and running for this school year. So with this school year looming on Wednesday, pleased to say we have 95% of what we need for day one. We're still cranking in some midnight oil to get the last few check boxes done so that we can really hit the ground running on Wednesday. Today we had, during the professional development day, we had all 4 schools were here. We gave them, the teachers all trained in different groups, specifically for their grade level area. And we also had 2 trainers from the company here on site to facilitate those trainings. So we had direct training from the companies, plus some added stuff from Bernie, myself, anybody else that was standing in the room. Maureen was really great about getting us some time in here and getting that done today before the school started, so people weren't completely blindsided for the first day of school. We've been working over the summer to move most of the data from iPass out into the new product. We ran into a little bit of a road bump with the data move because we had to do year-end reporting to the state. So that pushed us into mid-July. It was the earliest we could actually pull the data and get it to them and into the product. Normally this is like a 12 to 14 week process. We cut it down to like 6. And we're there. We have all the current year data there, all of the current schedules for all 4 schools. The only things that are still on the checklist that haven't gotten done yet, the parent module, we're still kind of working some of the kinks out of just to make sure that we have the right permissions set so that you don't accidentally get your neighbor's kid instead of your own. Things that just have some finished work on it, making sure the schedule appears correctly. I know that the schools are still kind of fluid with their schedules and will be for another week or so as the school starts and things happen. So that's in a nutshell where we are with PowerSchool. I'm really happy with the way the staff has embraced it for the most part. Everybody's been very excited. They're looking forward to using something new. I think everybody was just kind of fed up with the old one, to be honest, and they're kind of looking forward to something newer, better, fresher. I got a lot of high fives and a few scared faces, but that's to be expected. But overall, we're doing very well there, and kudos to Bernie. I mean, she knows every student in this district and every bit of data that's in our current system, and she's been going through that in mass, trying to get all of that information over into the new system, configured correctly, and going through spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet. So, and my staff in general, they've been picking up the slack, just trying to get school open to iPads and everything else that has to happen for day one. The other thing Joe talked about was the website. So that was another over the summer kick. Previously, we were using a product called, Joe's pulling it up now, called Blackboard. They own everything in the education space. So Blackboard was hosting our website, as well as providing us services for call notification, email notifications to parents. We've since kind of redone the whole package with one company called Aptigee. Joe and I had a conversation with this company back in April, I would say. And we kind of told them our woes, and they presented us with this option. This platform allows us to host our website and all of that all in one portal. So Joe has a one-stop communication spot now. I'm going to pick on him just because he has kind of an interesting role in this. Taking into account like a snow day. Previously, Joe would have to go onto the call notification, record the message, blast it out to everybody in the morning, get that 5 a.m. phone call. Then he would have to go onto the website, log in, then he'd have to go to his Twitter page, then he'd have to go to his Facebook page, and maybe 6 or 10 steps to get this. In the new platform, Joe actually can go right across the board and just check a bunch of boxes, and as long as a little bit of setup work, I'm not trying to make this sound like it's a breeze, but it'll allow him from one pane to be able to send out all of those notifications from one shot.
The beautiful thing about this, it's actually very interesting because this company does considerable market research from community to community. And they've generally found across the Commonwealth and also within our district, the number of people, our parents, our family members that are accessing our website or individual school websites, they're usually doing it on a mobile device, overwhelming majority. So our website through this company, Aptigee, is optimized for a mobile experience. Secondly, as this picture on the right shows, we now have our own app. So if you go to the App Store, whether you're on an Apple or an Android phone, and just do a quick search for Mendon-Upton, you'll see the Mendon-Upton Regional School District app. I strongly recommend that you download it. As you download it, just like any other app, it'll ask you whether you want to receive notifications or not that pop up on your phone. And then you can obviously allow them or don't allow them. And then you can very simply see and explore the app and go into anything. So I think the power of this is this gives us another tool to effectively communicate with our families. As a matter of fact, over the weekend, I send out a quick push notification about the whole issue of the EEE virus and what the school's response was with regard to after-school activities. So I think we still have a little bit of a learning curve, but Joe's point is totally dead on with regard to, kind of gives us one-stop shopping with regard to our website, our mass calling and email system, our social media linkages, and so on. So, job well done, my friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have a question. So some of the ways that at least I was using the website in the past, I think I talked with you in the hallway, I'm familiar with where pieces of information were, and I'm sure it's just getting used to the new website and finding all the information again.
Sure.
But is there like for the primary pieces of information, is there any way I can get a mapping of that, or just a simple list?
If you click on the, we can pull it back up. There is a way. There's like a site map, and I can send that to you because I don't have it directly in front of me. But there is.
So there's a site map.
Yeah, it does follow a very standard framework. So
Yeah,
you
good.
can do that, and I'll send that along and pass it through Joe, just so you can get it.
I'm just asking for the community.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's still a work in progress. We just went live with it a few weeks ago. As you may have noticed, it kind of transitioned quietly over the summer, which is kind of the way we wanted it. And we're still bringing stuff over and cleaning it up. So Katie Jordan, our webmaster, I guess, is doing, double duty on that that she normally does. And she's trying to get up-to-date information because we have a lot of stuff that was on there that was very dated.
Yep.
So we're cleaning that up at the same time.
Cool.
Any other questions?
When do you expect the parent component of PowerSchool to be ready to be rolled out to?
Good question. We're looking at early next week. I would say Tuesday, Wednesday by the time we just have a lot going on with the first couple days of school, getting the staff up to date and making sure that they're comfortable in entering, the basics like attendance and getting their first couple of grades. As far as the updates the parents could expect, I would follow the same kind of procedure we did with iPass. It would be every couple of weeks probably from the kind of the standard. Some teachers will be faster, some will be slower. It's just the way it is.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda, the budget closeout. Jay Byer.
Hi. All right, so you got a couple of things in your packet. One is a one-sheet page that I pretty much gave you the same last year with this year's accountings. Shows you our revenue, expenditures, and where we sort of ended up. The year-to-date closeout, I went and highlighted several of the accounts that really drove our budget, drove ourselves over in many areas. Clearly, it's in maintenance of buildings and in special education. Those were the two real heavy hitters that probably drove us up. You know, as always, I like to talk about snow and ice, and we did really well there, but that's the only reason we finished in any kind of solvency whatsoever. As far as the closeout goes, though, you know, we're going to end up with around $100,000 left. As you know, my goal every year is to finish with 1% of the budget not getting spent, which would be about $350,000, so I didn't achieve my goal in that. As far as the undesignated fund balance, which is the account that matters, I know that the state likes to look at E&D, but E&D is just sort of a state-controlled thing that doesn't really impact us as much. I think we're continuing to hit these accounts that are what I would refer to as one-time accounts in order to keep ourselves solvent. I mean, Joe mentioned the FY20 budget that we're in right now, and the reality is our state funding increased by $100,000. Local funding, they did very well. They gave us around $1 million, so that's about $1.1 million. Salaries alone are up $750,000 this year, $700,000 I should say. Salaries, health insurance, transportation, out-of-district tuitions, all of these things continue to drive our budget, and the revenue's not there. So where we had spent several years really building up our reserve accounts, school choice, E&D, undesignated fund balance, all those things, we are starting to dwindle those accounts because otherwise we're going to be looking at very substantial cuts because there just isn't enough money coming in to fund what we're trying to do. I'm estimating our E&D at the end of this year, after the DOR looks at all the things, it's probably going to be in the, you know, I think on the sheets you have, it says around 550, 600,000. It's probably going to be less than that. It's probably going to be closer to 300,000, which means we won't have that as a funding source for FY21. School choice is a little better, but we had to tap into school choice quite extensively, both last year and this year, so that too begins to dwindle. So I think, you know, I'm forecasting that we're going to have a tough call in FY21 in order to get things going. FY20, we're going to be fine. I mean, we've got a budget in place. One thing you should know is we are going to have to recertify the FY20 budget at our next meeting. It doesn't change the town's assessments in any way, shape, or form, but we did get additional state aid, and we need to include that in our final budget there. That's about it right now. I don't know. Is there any questions on any of the information I gave you? I like no questions. That means my spreadsheets are actually understandable. Sometimes you put these sheets together and they make sense to me, and I'm the only one.
So Jay, just quickly on the closeout. So you're saying that estimated E&D certification for basically the end of 2019 is 624?
I think it's going to be less than that. What I didn't recall until I just did the fund balance rollover this morning.
Okay.
So when I did it this morning and I looked at everything, one of the things that we did last year that I wasn't accounting for before I put this all together when I did the rollover this morning is we appropriated money that came in from MSBA over into that stabilization account, the capital stabilization account that we created last year. You have to take that off of what's going to be left for the E&D certification. That is $337,000.
So there's the capital stabilization account.
Yes, we have $675,000, I would say, in an account for capital projects going down. This, if you remember, both towns a year ago allowed us to establish this account. We should be able to use that to do some of the building stuff going forward that is really crippling us. But there are some major projects, as you know. We've got a capital list that's pretty extensive. $675,000 really doesn't put a dent in it. But there are some stuff that we could probably address in the next 3 or 4 years that, you know, we probably need to address. You know, going back to last year, the things that are driving us are, you know, as an example, the water treatment system at Clough. We just over the summer, I know you probably all saw emails that there was no water at Clough for about 3 weeks. The reason for that is the water tank, the potable water tank, had to be drained, cleaned, recoated on the inside and then filled up, and the system had to be activated again. That's going to run us about $30,000 just to do that. We still have to do something with the treatment system that we're working with DEP on. We have a new water treatment operator that's advising us to do a couple of things that I think previously we hadn't looked at. So we're trying to re-examine that before we sink a bunch of money into doing more work there. We had issues at MISCO with the boiler, as you know, we talked about it last year. All these things are continuing to drive us. I'm hoping that this year we're not going to get hit with these kind of things. But I can tell you over the summer here at Nipmuc, we had to re-weld a couple of sections of the boiler. I think we had another water leak, a small one today at Clough, although I don't think it's a substantial cost or anything like that. The well went out at MISCO at one point. We had to replace the pump. Again, these are, $2,000 or $3,000 jobs, but they all add up when you keep getting $3,000 here and $2,000 there. It is my childhood. Somebody I met when I was a child, Everett Dirksen, who was a senator from Illinois back in the 50s and 60s, used to say, $1 million here and $1 million there. Suddenly you're talking about real money. That's what I feel like sometimes. Every time I see a maintenance thing, it's like, okay, that's another $20,000. What's it going to be?
And then when you look at our expenditure report and close out of the year, our public school transportation for SPED and our private school external stuff was significantly above what we were expecting.
Yeah, there was some SPED costs, out-of-district tuition, transportation costs. They continue to just continually increase. Consultant costs for what's now called medical therapeutic services, but it's basically consultants for pretty much anything related to students on IEPs. That's substantially over. We tried to take what we had the previous year, we carried it over, but we split it between these accounts, and I had to do some finagling to get it in the right places. But we have significantly increased those line items for this coming year because, my approach is if we spent it last year, we're probably going to spend it again this year. Out-of-district tuition is always a challenge. I mean, we usually try to appropriate an extra $50,000 to $100,000 just in case something comes up. But quite honestly, that doesn't even cover a tuition sometimes. If you have one child go out, you could be looking at $100,000 in tuition and $50,000 in transportation. We had one out-of-district school that we were notified on August 15th, I want to say, that their tuition was going up by 22%. Retroactive to August 1st, so we got a bill for what we didn't pay in August and going forward, but that was about a $25,000 hit. That just, it just keeps coming.
And tuition to collaborative schools is the tuition to Norfolk Aggie, correct?
No, tuition to collaborative schools is what's called bi-county collaborative. Those are out-of-district placements for special ed, but they're public schools. And that was one of the things that I went and spoke to the legislature on to see if we can amend the move-in law so that it applies to all out-of-district placements instead of just private schools. Norfolk Aggie is up in the same series of accounts, but in the regular ed line item. Quite honestly, we actually dropped a couple of students. We had 15 last year. I believe we have 13 this year. So that actually worked out fairly well. We pay for transportation as well, which we do as a collaborative. We had another district, actually the town of Leicester, who wants to join in, and they're going to bring their child to Millbury, where the closest stop is, but that reduced our cost a little bit on that. So we actually do really well on, the tuition is a killer, but the transportation piece isn't too bad. I mean, we're transporting maybe 13 kids, and we're paying, I think, about $15,000 a year for that, where sometimes in a special ed situation, for one kid, you're paying $45,000 to $50,000.
Yep.
And then we, as far as 21 goes, we go out to bid on transportation again this year. We negotiate all of our contracts this year. So all that is stuff that's going to be hanging over us as we begin to look at forward to FY21, which I know sounds crazy since the school year just started, but my head is already looking toward the next school year as soon as we get through the first week.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Jay? Okay, moving on. So, new business, Emergency Education Services Analysis presentation.
Okay, I'm very, very pleased this evening to introduce two gentlemen who were in district last spring, Dr. Michael Neiman and Dr. Michael Palandino. who have extensive background in special education administration and administration in general. And they are from Futures, Inc., which is a consulting firm that works with school districts actually across the nation in kind of conducting an analysis of all different types of services, but the real expertise is in looking at special services staffing, the effectiveness of delivery of services, and the efficiency. So you have in the packet the report based upon several days in the district and kind of looking at our staffing patterns. And Mike and Mike are here to kind of give an overview of their findings and analysis. So, gentlemen.
Thank you, Superintendent. Is there a remote to access to advance it?
If you want to move this over there and just run it off this, that would be perfectly fine.
Yeah, advancing. Well, good evening. Thank you, Superintendent. We look forward to presenting a summary of the report. Okay, we are confident. Just want to throw that out there. So, as the superintendent said, it's the Mike and Mike show. Either you get both of our names right or wrong. I think we created a few headaches for the people when we were here in the spring. So, in addition to Dr. Palladino and I, who are the principals, I want to acknowledge some other people on our advance point. Caitlin Mortensen, who supported the data. You'll see in the report, there's quite a bit of data. David Boyle as well helped in the data analysis, and Heather Santinelli, she's our executive assistant, who helped with the final presentation of the report, the final formatting. So a lot went into this report from our end, a lot went into it from the district's end. So we just want to acknowledge the superintendent, the partnership, the principals. Dr. Palladino went to all the schools, and we'll talk about that methodology, but it was quite undertaking, even though we'll talk, the scope was quite limited to 3 items. It was quite undertaking for everybody to have us in the district, all the data requests. Everyone was so responsive and professional, and again, I want to thank everybody in the central office for that. I think that the results of the report, the comprehensiveness is really due, again, to a whole bunch of people. We do want to acknowledge the district's role in that. So the primary purposes of tonight's presentation to the board are to review the methodology of the study, talk about how we arrived at the results, to present pertinent information for contextual purposes. So when we talk a little bit about least restrictive environment or free appropriate public education, some of the things that Dr. Palladino will talk about, when we get to perhaps some contextual information, it's just to kind of bring the results into focus. Offer key findings, provide areas of opportunity or recommendations, and facilitate a forum for discussion. We would welcome any questions from the board throughout. We will have time, again, for discussion, but if there's anything that's not clear, we would welcome questions throughout the presentation. We talked about the scope being very focused. As the superintendent said, we do our work nationwide all the way from Maine to California, because all districts, in some way, shape, or form, whether fiscally, programmatically, out-of-district placements, you name it, every single district in the country is struggling with special ed to some degree, and that's not an overstatement. That's true. So when we work in partnership with districts, we're really trying to focus on those areas to be mindful of the resources the district has, and to really fine-tune those areas. So the areas that, in partnership with the district, that we focused on, Mike, if you go back for a second, or related services. So those are services like speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behavioral health, that are related to the IEP. That's why they're called related services. Certified, non-certified teachers, there we're looking at really the numbers and how the service delivery model looks, and perhaps there's some programmatic information that goes into that discussion. Then central office personnel, again, looking at sort of how is central office, the SSS office configured? How is it interfacing with school-based personnel? What do those numbers look like? And again, kind of reflecting on current practices in the central office. So when talking about the methodology, you can see in Appendix A of the report, we talked with 50 stakeholders in the district, and we feel really good about that. That's a really nice sample size, given the size of the district and given the scope, which was laser focused. That 50 really does represent a really nice cross-section of different perspectives. We talked with central office leadership, principals, teachers, paraprofessionals, team chairs and related services. And again, you're going to get to see that, that next slide, how that broke out. Questions were catered to the interviewee's area of expertise and relevance. So the first question that Dr. Palladino asked was this idea of culture. Are students with disabilities all your students at the school? Is there any sense of here's a special ed student and here's a gen ed student? So that question was universal. It was a question you asked of everybody, whether they were a principal or a teacher or a paraprofessional. Those are questions I asked the related service providers. Because again, this idea of culture and that ownership of all students is so critical to the discussion of a special ed program. Non-evaluative site visits. Dr. Palladino doesn't own a clipboard, but I think if you did, you'd leave it in your car, right?
In the car.
Yeah, because when we walk through the schools, we don't want teachers or paras or principals or anyone in the school to feel like we're evaluating. It's non-evaluative, but it's a way for our team to get a sense of the continuum of services, because again, that drives staffing. The way a district will choose to use its staffing is really driven by its philosophy and its instructional practices. Comparative analysis, you'll see, we'll get to a chart as an example of comparative analysis. Dr. Palladino and I have conducted about 50 assessments in Massachusetts in the last, say, 10 years between both as an organization, and Dr. Palladino is a member of NESDEC, which is a entity that supports schools as well. So we really have a nice sample size in Massachusetts because we are based in Springfield. We have a lot of data at our fingertips, and that was really helpful to provide that reflection point for the district. And then document reviews, looking at policies, procedures, assignments of one-to-one. Dr. Palladino will talk quite a bit about the assignment of paraprofessionals during this segment. So it was really helpful to understand sort of the systems in place and what the district has to offer. So again, I mentioned that we talked to 50 stakeholders. I'm not going to belabor and go through each item, but you can see that we had a lot of representation from those different areas. So we feel really good in terms of the people who spoke to us. And just to reiterate, it was confidential, so you'll see the report in tonight's presentation. There's no way to know who said what. So we're going to start with the first of the three sections, that's related services. We talked about part of our role tonight is not just to present the findings, but to present contextual information. So I'm a speech language pathologist by trade, and related services, whether it's speech or OT or PT, work within an educational model in a school. So if you think about ways that students might receive therapy, there's clinical or medical therapy, which is typically outside the school, but within the school, related service providers have to work with an educational model, because our role is to help students access their educational program. So that is a real key question that we asked, and it was based on those questions, based on IP reviews, based on our discussion with team chairs, that the related services are really working solidly within that educational model. So that's a real celebration. Despite some challenges, there's a healthy sense of culture of celebration when students are ready to exit or have services reduced. We don't always see that. Sometimes those are hard discussions at IP tables to say we're going to go from 60 minutes to OT to 30 minutes. It should rightly be viewed as a celebration in our view because the student is making progress. But sometimes not all IP stakeholders will see it that way. They see it as almost taking away from that student's IEP. So again, it's never going to be 100%, but based on our conversations, the IP teams are really doing a very good job explaining this whole idea of educational model, that IEPs and related services are not meant to be forever. They're there to support students until they can reach a level of independence. So that was another really nice celebration to see. And for the most part, we saw this idea of front loading. Front loading is essentially giving younger students more education, more educational services than older students. So if you think about the whole idea of early intervention or Head Start, the research shows that you give students a lot of those early intervening programs, because that's when the brain has plasticity, and that's where they get the big bang for the buck. And as students get older, even though some students with significant disabilities may need, say, speech in middle and high school, typically we see this dwindling of services over time. So that's front loading. RSPs, the related service providers, you'll see that in the report, are seen as effective and valued team members, very professional group of related service providers, well regarded by teachers, by principals, by team chairs. They really are seen as a valued component of the IEP team. There is a need for exit entry guidelines for speech and language services, and for those to be more systematic. Again, the district is not unusual. Most districts that we have analyzed do not have guidelines. Again, they're meant to be guidelines to ensure equal access for students. It's not meant to take the I out of the IEP. The I stands for individualized, but it does help the team determine. So one student on one side of town doesn't have any more or less access to services than the student on the other side. So it's that walking that line between individualization and making all access to a service is equitable. As depicted below, Mendon-Upton is lightly staffed in psychology and lightly staffed in behavioral health, and highly staffed in PT. Speech and OT are staffed to expectation. So I thought it's okay, I'll spend a little time on this chart. So here's the discipline, and again, this is the exact same chart that you'll see in the report. The district ARI stands for Availability Ratio Index. It's a fancy way of saying how many staff are available to students in any given discipline. It's not their caseload. So, for example, when we divide the number of students with disabilities in the district by the number of speech staff, there's 65 students with disabilities for every one speech language provider. If that makes sense. And that allows us to do that apples to apples comparison to other districts. So the expected ratio in Massachusetts is 60-1. So most districts, the average is 60 students with disabilities to every one SLP. Again, that's not the SLP's caseload. That's the amount of students with disabilities in proportion to the amount of speech language staff. And we have a standard deviation. So again, I'm not sure if I'm making people break out sweats from their stats courses, but if you think about a bell-shaped curve, the standard deviation is from 16% to 84%. So the standard deviation is 10. So anything within 50 to 70 is in the ballpark. And you can see 65 would fall right within that range. OT, same principle. The expected ratio is 180 students. And again, less students require OT services in speech and language because the connectivity between speech and language and academics. In the district, as of the spring, and we know this is somewhat of a moving number because districts have different needs from year to year, different staffing. So this feels a little bit like rear-view driving, but this was the data as of the spring. So the OT ARI of 160-1 compares to 181, but it's still within that bell-shaped curve because the standard deviation is 30. PT is more generously staffed at 252-1, even with that standard deviation of 50, so it would fall on the left-hand side, in other words, more generously staffed. Psychology is the one discipline that we use a different metric for. The National Association for School Psychologists recommends a benchmarking of overall students, not just the students with disabilities, because psychologists do a lot of work within gen ed, RTI or MTSS that they're starting to call now in Massachusetts, bullying in some districts, different initiatives within gen ed. So the psychology, again, when we were here in the spring, there's one in-district psychologist, and there was some contractor work from a local collaborative. It was 2,000-1. So the higher the number, the less generously staffed. So you can see here, psychology is an area that was very lightly staffed in the district. And then when we throw in behavioral health, which is school adjustment counselors, some schools have social workers. Behavioral health is really anyone who can support the behavioral health needs of students. It's 49, and that is less than the expected ratio. So it's a lightly staffed behavioral health So those are the main findings for that first area. As is currently occurring in response to the growing needs, we do recommend the district create district-wide exit entry guidelines, especially for speech and language, because the numbers. One of the, and Mike is going to get into it when we talk about ways to think about how central office can be reconfigured, because there's a lot on central office right now in terms of workload. The district could assign a lead staff member to provide oversight and support of the RSPs. So when I was in the medical field, our largest department within rehab was physical therapy, because in hospitals, people are debilitated, they need more PT than they need speech and language. In a school, speech language tends to be the plurality of related services, just because of the nature of what speech and language does. So it could be an SLP, just given, again, the numbers that could have, we're not talking a totally dedicated position, but just for consideration, some districts have a stipended position for related services. Maybe it's, again, it doesn't need to be cost prohibitive, but it might be a few hours a month to help coordinate some of those things that are exclusive to related services like professional development. There are some very innovative workload models, again, to meet the needs of students. So it's very cruel math and special ed, as you know. Jay talked about this. It's basically an underfunded mandate. So the question is, how can districts make the most of their resources? One of them is to kind of be reflective of the types of students. Sometimes students don't need weekly services. There's a National 301 model, which means that students could get three sessions per month and have the fourth session be a consult where the speech and language pathologist is consulting with a general ed teacher. It's not for every student, but it is another way to kind of make sure that students are getting what they need, and also an adherence to least restrictive environment, not pulling them unnecessarily from the general ed classroom. There is a model, again, we talked about our national work. We do quite a bit of work in New York. So this model is somewhat unique. And again, I think Michael knows this more than most, because you're working with social emotional learning. But students with emotional behavioral needs is becoming a huge epidemic in the country. And it's not just students with IEPs. We're talking about general ed students that have social emotional issues, that might be school phobic, that have issues at home that are affecting their learning. So this whole idea of how to meet the needs of students with behavioral health is a huge problem. Some schools in New York, I mentioned, are renting out space. So the community health agencies are actually renting out space in the secondary schools. So students are getting their wraparound services of their community health after, comprehensive programming in the school itself. So we're not saying that this is should be done tomorrow, but it is an interesting and innovative model that the district might consider as part of its long-term planning to, again, kind of insource that behavioral health. They bill Medicaid or they bill third parties all by themselves. It's no cost to the district, and it really is a wonderful way to link what's happening in the school to the community.
I'll jump in here because that particular area it did come up in our interviews here in the district. But it's come almost everywhere we go. School health and mental health issues are becoming a real problem. And they're not just special education issues. They're general education issues as well. And so I know that the district here has a strategic goal and a 5-year plan. And so it's an opportunity for you at this point to figure out how you're going to attack it. Because it's not something, in my opinion, from the things that we're seeing in the schools, it's not something that the schools can handle by themselves. I think what you have to really understand is your community and do an assessment of your community. What are the key issues? There are all kinds of different factors that are contributing to this. Some call it technology, some call it high stakes testing, some call it issues in the home. All kinds of different issues are affecting kids. The bullying, and now that we have technology and it's out there. And so the real issue is how are we going to deal with it, because we still have to educate kids, and we cannot any longer ignore the issues that are going on in the kids' minds. So as you move forward in this whole area, as other schools are now, a lot of places we go are putting in social and emotional health types of things in terms of the curriculum. And what we're suggesting is you think about a curriculum specifically as you over the next few years.
Next slide.
I will add, before I get to this, that the people that I interviewed, although personally I interviewed over 30 people, And every single one of them loved working in this school district. So it was really enjoyable for me in the time that we spent here, so you should be proud of that. Looking at some of the staffing and some of the other things, Michael had mentioned that we ask specific types of questions, and one of the, again, looking at the culture, we want to see how people feel about how they're being supported with regard to supplies and materials, technologies, and they felt very supported. And I'll just add, I'm happy to see the technologies that they're feeling supported, because I knew Joe when he was in high school in Ashland, and I was a collaborative director in Natick and Framingham, and Joe was a high school student helping us do our website at the time. I'm talking 15 years ago anyway. And so it's nice to see that he's had some contribution to your district. Although the certified staff are complimentary of the quality of the professional development opportunities, paraprofessionals reported that their PD offerings are limited, and so it's something to be thinking about as you move forward. Paraprofessionals are providing and delivering a lot of direct care services and a lot of direct intervention, and so it's important that they understand and be up on any of the changes, and wherever possible, if possible, to include them in some of the professional development things that you're working on. In your district, you have two categories of paraprofessionals. You have what we consider ABA techs, which are really focused on behavioral issues for the most part. And applied behavioral analysis is the ABA piece. And you also have the regular special education paraprofessionals. Although that the ABA techs do employ methodologies other than ABA, the title may be misleading, and so it's something we think about as we move forward. Currently, as we look at the ratios that Michael was talking about, you have 26.8 FTE ABA techs and 30.9 FTE for a total of 57.7 full-time equivalencies. You may have more people than that, but the full-time equivalency for paraprofessionals in the district is 57.7. That equates to a ratio of 6.12 students with disabilities for every one paraprofessional. And what we see in other districts as an average is around 8 to 1. So in one regard, you are well-staffed with regard to the expected ratio of paraprofessionals. Three mitigating factors are that you have lower than expected certified teachers, you have a composition of students with disabilities with higher needs than expected, and you have more students served within the district. And so when you're doing, and you're also doing inclusion, and when you do that, you're going to need that support help. And so this is not unusual to see.
Yeah, if I can talk a little, Mike, about those mitigating factors. So again, we're somewhat agnostic about the number of paraprofessionals. When it's high, it's not necessarily a celebration, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because again, there might be reasons for that. We've been in some school districts where there are a lot of paraprofessionals, but there are very few students that have district placements. So it makes sense because the students with the highest needs are being kept in the district. So as Mike was saying, when we look at those mitigating variables, we want to understand how that shook out. So when we look at the special ed teachers, the ratio was 13 to 1. And in Massachusetts, typically it's 15 to 1. So again, we're talking about our database. So most schools have, for every 15 students with disabilities, there's one special ed teacher. In the district, it's a little more generously staffed. It's a little less than 14. So we couldn't say that was a mitigating factor why there would be more paraprofessionals. Because sometimes in districts, when there's less teachers, they're hard to find. There's, again, another national epidemic. Sorry to bring all this good news about special ed. It's happening. That might be the reason why there's more special ed. Some districts have very high students with high needs. Some school districts, for whatever reason, might have students with higher numbers of students on the autism spectrum requiring, as Dr. Palladino said, ABA services, applied behavioral analysis, discrete trials. It tends to be very adult intensive. Some schools have, for whatever reason, again, students with significant medical issues that might be multiply disabled. So When we looked at the district, the constellation of high needs, autism spectrum disorder, emotional disability, and multiple disabilities and intellectual disabilities, is 21% of the entire special ed population. That compares to 27% in the state. Therefore, we couldn't say that the constellation of students and disabilities was a mitigating factor. Lastly, when we looked at out-of-district placements, there's 8%, or at least there was of the spring, 8% of students that were served out of district, and compares to an expected range within 7 to 10 in Massachusetts, so it's right in the ballpark. So that we couldn't say was a mitigating factor, that there were more students in the district that would kind of explain the reason for a paraprofessional. So when we look at those variables, as I think you're about to say, there's some other reason why.
Right.
The practice patterns, the ABA text, and sort of the prescription of the service.
Yeah, and that gets into some of the things we'll talk about with regard to things you might be thinking about. So I think what we're talking about as you move forward is starting to thinking about put systems in place that will take a closer look at eligibility for paraprofessional services, especially when you get into that one-to-one type of a situation. In that way, we're looking for further parity and equalization of access to services. And that way you'll have a better able to ensure that for students across the district, irrespective of the level of parental or legal advocacy. I think we need to be thinking about review paraprofessional allocation for specialized programs. Because these programs and services are in a more restrictive setting, the staffing pattern should match. If the matrix indicates a 2-to-1 ratio, then the classroom schedule should match. The authors have provided examples within the report.
You'll see that in one of your appendices. Yeah. So I think that goes back just to talk about the exit entry guidelines. It's an analog to speech and language guidelines that when teams meet on the IEP, it's individualized, but this provides a framework for the allocation of the paraprofessionals.
The whole idea of ABA, which is applied behavioral analysis, is very specific to the area, or has been anyway, to the area of students who have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. Although in the district they are doing some other things, I think that just by using the ABA designation itself, there ought to be some consideration to changing that and taking a look at some other strategies that give you more flexibility in terms of how you program for kids with autism.
Just as an IEP, teachers want to prescribe a certain reading methodology, like font to Simpanella, for example. That would never be put in an IEP. Just like, again, assigning an ABA paraprofessional, the title almost is misleading because it gives an expectation of a methodology, when in fact it's just one more tool in the toolbox.
Again, come back to the whole idea of specialized training for some of the paraprofessionals who are working with some of these more difficult students. And some of the people have been in the district for a while, and they know the students, and they've been working with them. Others are new and kind of learned on the job. And so it's kind of something that you need to keep in mind as you're dealing with students with more severe disabilities. And also, as you go down the road and you start dealing more with the social and emotional issues, and if you're going to need some support help with paraprofessionals in that role, whether that's in special education or general education environments, those people ought to have some background and training and understanding of what's happening in that whole social and emotional field. And so one of the things that we thought about would be to have a paraprofessional from each school to provide input to the professional development committees in those schools.
If I could just go back to the second to last bullet. In Appendix C in the report, you'll see a return demonstrate form, and that's basically a template. So let's say I'm an SLP working with Mike on a particular communication methodology. If Michael has an ABA or a one-to-one, just make sure that the paraprofessional kind of returns and demonstrates that information so that those skills can be generalized in the classroom. So again, as Mike's saying, the paraprofessionals play such a critical role in being that link between certified teachers and the related service providers, and this is just one more modality to make sure, again, the skill sets are being acquired.
And so one of the things that we thought about would be to have a paraprofessional from each school to provide input to the professional development committees in those schools. If I could just go back to the second to last bullet. In Appendix C in the report, you'll see a return demonstrate form, and that's basically a template. So let's say I'm an SLP working with Mike on a particular communication methodology. If Michael has an ABA or a one-to-one, just make sure that the paraprofessional kind of returns and demonstrates that information so that those skills can be generalized in the classroom. So again, as Mike's saying, the paraprofessionals play such a critical role in being that link between certified teachers and the related service providers, and this is just one more modality to make sure, again, the skill sets are being acquired. One of the other areas that we felt that the district was lightly staffed was in the whole administrative realm, and specifically in the special education department. And so what we're suggesting is ways that you could think about easing up the caseload, if you will, for the director of special education in that role, because of it just spread too thin. There are too many things. In addition to special education, we're talking about 504s, we're talking about all other types of services that the McKinney-Vento, I'm not sure how many of you know about McKinney-Vento, but that's the kids are coming from the homeless being bused into the school districts. And so what we're taking a look at is what we're suggesting is you take a look at how to maybe resolve that problem, because it is putting added stress on the special education staff, because they feel sometimes that they need to have more support from the special education department, and the people there are spread too thin. So what we're suggesting is that you think about using your team chairs to attend some of the out-of-district meetings, and more specifically, it would make practical sense to have them attend these meetings for students with disabilities that would otherwise be attending their assigned schools. This would also establish a connection to parents in the event that students with disabilities could possibly return to their neighborhood schools. Again, that last comment should always be a goal and objective. And so by having the team chair out there on a regular basis, I think that would help with that process. Once the requisite workload for the director can be addressed, increasing the director's visibility within the district would be helpful, I think, to the people who are working in the various schools.
So just to summarize, Mike, if you don't mind, just taking over. Again, this is excerpted from the report, the summary and final commentary. There's a lot to like about this district. In many ways, students with disabilities are being very well served. It's a very professional group. And as Dr. Pellegrino said, there's a lot going that's working very well. We'd like to talk about perhaps some priority areas across the three. Again, if we talk about elevator speeches in 30 seconds, what would you say, Michael, to help the district? If we had to identify things that are particularly salient in those areas, unrelated services, just to reiterate, institute the speech and language exit and entry criteria or guidelines, consider the identification of our lead related service provider to be that liaison. Again, it could be a stipended position, not cost prohibitive, but really provide extra support to the director. Under paraprofessionals, institute a rubric that specifies the need and intensity for one-to-one or shared support. So again, it's based on data. What does the student need in terms of different behaviors or activities of daily living? We have rubrics that we're happy to share with district leadership if that helps. Continue intensive professional development for the paraprofessionals. Again, we talked about they're the front line. They spend the most time with the students, and to make sure they have the capacity to deal with the student needs, whether it's behavior or academics, with topics that correlate to really the areas that support student need is critical. Reconsider rebranding that ABA Tech to a more inclusive title, whatever that is. I mean, we don't get too hung up on the title other than to say that ABA does become too confining, and perhaps the name is leading to a narrower view of all the things that they could do. Central office, one of the things that we talked about, easing the workload of the director, because there's so much. When you saw that number, it probably jumped out at you, that 382 to 1, that's the ratio right now of central office administrators to students in the district. That's extremely leanly staffed. And the best way, in our view, is to delegate some of those responsibilities currently within the purview of central office, and maybe assign some of those out-of-district placements to the team chairs. So if you have a team chair at Nipmuc and there's a student that's supposed to be in an out-of-district placement, it makes sense for a representative from that school to be at that IEP meeting, because they can talk about the services that exist at the neighborhood school. If the IEP team would determine this might be the more appropriate placement. So there's a lot that makes sense both logistically and programmatically to have the team chairs at each school provide oversight or attend those IEPs for students that would otherwise be at their school, if that makes sense. So again, it's just one way to think about that. And as to rotating office hours, again, as Dr. Palladino said, once the director's workload would allow all these things pie in the sky, a wonderful way for outreach is to actually insource rotating office hours. I was a professor at college. The students came to see me, but I was thinking about it. If they were centered in a certain part of campus, I could just as easily have gone to see them in a room that would have allowed them not to have to traipse across campus. So there's something about that outreach where you insource the office hours, and then people feel much more connectivity to central office leadership.
So in a quick closing, I just want to just say and reiterate, this is a good school district, and it's especially a good school district with regard to special education. You are consistently, students, you're within about the 15% range in terms of the number of students, or the ratio, or the rate of students in the district. That's several percentage points below the state average. You're within, with out-of-district placements, you're within an acceptable range with regard to what's going on in the state and what's going on in other school districts like this. Bottom line is special education is an expensive deal, and we heard some comments earlier before. And so as you look at this, and if we can help answer any questions, the reality is that you are doing a very good job in a lot of ways.
So that is our presentation. Again, we will open up for questions.
I have a question on, it's, which slide is it? Slide 12 for the ratio of SWD, 6.12 SWDs for every one paraprofessional. So when you're talking about mitigating factors there, what are you trying to convey? Are you saying that, because you're saying that none of these mitigating factors are relevant?
That's correct. What we're saying is there is nothing in the three primary variables that would explain why there's a higher ratio than expected. That there is a higher number of paraprofessionals within the district, and because none of those three variables explained it, we really, I think, arrived on really the practice patterns of the overprescription of the one-to-one or shared.
Overprescription of over one-to-one. So, for example, if you, I think one of the slides we mentioned something about the more severe disabilities. You don't have a high percentage of those compared to other districts. So why then would you have the ratio that you have? And so that brings us to look at how are they being assigned, and when as kids move on, are they being reassigned elsewhere? How is that being looked at? And so we didn't get into that level.
Yeah, the answer really is the practice pattern. So let's take ABA. When ABA is truly ABA, it's applied behavioral analysis. Again, it's a very labor, adult-intensive, one-to-one, taking data. If the district is choosing that methodology, that explains really why there would be more, because it's so much more of an adult-intensive methodology.
Even though you may have fewer students with autism, the methodology that you're using is labor-intensive.
I see.
And that's where we're going back to the exit entry guidelines for the assignment of paras, one-to-one, and shared, so it can be a very objective and systematic discussion at the IEP table. So only the students that really require that level of need.
So that means that you perceive that this is a difference from how other school districts would be behaving. Okay, interesting.
Based on our experience, the reliance on ABA methodologies is higher in the district.
We would likely see higher numbers of students with more severe disabilities being serviced in the district.
Understood.
But that's your assumption. You didn't get into that deep level of checking that out, is that correct?
We have a large database of other districts and what their delivery system looks like in Massachusetts.
No, I mean for our district.
We did IEP analysis.
Oh yes, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. Yes, we looked at IPs, we looked at frequencies, so we were able to validate that qualitative information with a deeper dive on the quantitative data.
So you do know as a fact that it is due to overprescription of one-to-one?
That is the leading variable.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify, okay.
So in your analysis and in your database of other districts and their models and how they deliver services, I guess my question would be is those are all great recommendations in terms of how we optimize or improve the system, but are there other models that we may should or should look at that might be more applicable towards the way we deliver services and our approach
Sure.
from the different levels that are there?
I've lost my partner in crime here because I was going to defer to you. Mike. You caught the
I
question.
didn't get, I was trying to turn off the stupid phone.
So
The question was just very, very simply like, you've looked at our system kind of like as it is and the way it works and functions and how do we optimize it, but are there actually other kind of models that are out there that we should be looking at that may drive some more significant or holistic changes?
I actually will start that and you can finish it. There are other models, like we mentioned the TEACH method in there. That's a program out of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and it's more of a holistic way for students with autism to basically interact with others. It's heavy on communication. ABA is very much an adult-student interaction. So there are other options. Again, it's individualized. If ABA methodology is the most appropriate for the student, that's what they should be getting. But to your point, there are other tools in the toolbox. And I think actually as students do get older, because we investigated that they call them ABA texts at the middle and high, but they're really not getting ABA methodologies per se. So it's already starting. But all that to say, even younger students, we think that there could be more tools in the toolbox for providers, which if the superintendent would like, we're happy to share those resources.
I think more tools in the toolbox is really what we're talking about, because ABA has become a very widely accepted methodology here in Massachusetts. It's very labor intensive, and it's not the only way to service kids. It's good for some kids. There are other methodologies that are good for other kids and work better for other kids. And so I think in terms of understanding and how you deliver the services to students is something that you take a look at, and those people that would require a particular type of methodology, you use it, and for someone who would benefit from something else, you use that.
So that determination of which methodology a certain child would have falls on the director or falls on
the IEP team,
which is like
the entire IEP team.
Yeah, IEP team, basically.
But if there's information of more a menu of different options to meet a student, that certainly should be a tool in the toolbox for the entire IEP team as well.
Question about the related service providers. And you mentioned the increasing social emotional needs of the student population. Did you gather any data about how we're using the available district resources as related service providers for students?
Yes, I mean specific to behavioral health.
Right.
It's our sense that psychologists are primarily evaluators.
Right.
So they're doing initial evals and triennial reviews.
Right.
And the school adjustment counselors are doing more of the direct counseling. But when you saw that number, and I'll correct that, it said 49 to 3, it should be 49 to 1, and I apologize for the error. But when we looked at behavioral health, that was certainly a number that jumped out at us as the district. Again, we don't make assumptions about personnel, but that certainly was a low number.
Right. And in comparison to your database of other school districts, how do we compare to what you're seeing across?
It's low. It's low. And again, Massachusetts, in Connecticut, in Rhode Island, where we have a really good database, it's very different than Arizona and Texas. Caseloads in California, for example, are 28 to 1. That's the average in Massachusetts, it's 15 to 1. So we really have to do an apples to apples comparison to Massachusetts, and the behavioral health ratios are low here.
So just to clarify, the ratios you were coming up with were a comparison to other ratios found within Massachusetts rather than a ratio maybe based on best practices model.
Exactly. These are local ratios because Massachusetts, I feel like I'm going to call it the Newcastle, is it's a unique state in terms of providing their standard for providing services, and to us it's only fair to compare Massachusetts to Massachusetts.
Did you look at other best practice models for staff ratios or anything like that, or just comparing to what's happening?
Sure, I mean, it's a fair question. Quantitatively, we wanted to limit it to Massachusetts, but qualitatively, like best practices, we talked about the TEACH method out of North Carolina. That's more of a national discussion.
moments in a discussion like this where you realize, oh my God, there's a lot I don't know here, so thank you for informing me.
Ever changing, thank you.
Well, it is ever changing, but at the same point, I think building off of what she just said, I think it would be great to get an understanding as you look at best practices from a national base. I think when you limit yourself to one specific geographic scope, you kind of find yourself, been there, done that, we kind of do it that way. I'm not saying that Massachusetts is not progressive maybe in some of these areas, but I have to imagine that, you know, some of the other areas that might have limited resources or limited scopes or other challenges financially are looking at things in a different way and are trying to look at how do we bring the best services, and maybe there are other unique ways. To your point, not every child is the same too.
Yeah, we agree. ABA methodologies, you tend to see it more in districts that are closer to major hospitals. So like, you know, we've been in districts, we were in Houston, there's a touch of ABA. It's not quite to the extent here because they're close to the hospitals where there are BCBAs and they're, it's an interesting artifact, but you're correct. Countrywide, ABA is not as embraced as it is in New England.
Maybe it's time for us to look at something more in a hybrid-like model that brings some of the other things to bear as well. Just to your point, it is. I do agree. It is about the toolkit and expanding the toolkit. Mm-hmm. How does that come into play, and what does that help us do?
Is there a state model that you would say most closely resembles where we should be going?
I wouldn't say there's a state model. I'd say when we do a little research, there are district models to emulate, and we can certainly, again, we can share that. But in our view, it's one that's why we talked about changing the ABA to a learning service specialist, because working with students with autism, such a complicated disability, let's say, those paraprofessionals should be trained in all those methodologies. It shouldn't just be one.
Just curious, for the behavioral health, you mentioned that's very lightly staffed. I know we have some relationships with community mental health providers and partnerships at the middle and high school level, and I just wonder how that kind of plays into your assessment and how that compares to what other districts are doing across the state.
It is a great start. Again, we don't have any hard and fast empirical data, but I can take anecdotally. Behavioral health supports in the community are not keeping pace with what students need. And the fact that you already have these discussions is a great start. And I think what we're saying in that slide is that next step would be truly to establish that partnership so they would have a bricks and mortar relationship with the district.
But that's an area of concern. In every district we go, and how you address that over the next 5 years in your plan is going to be critical. I personally don't, and the things that I've been seeing in the districts that we've been in, and the stuff that I've been doing some research on, I don't think it's something that the schools can handle by themselves. I think the issues are more community-based issues, and I think the thing to be thinking about is to understand your community and know what's going on. What are the parameters in your community? What are some of the factors? A lot of the stuff that I have right now, we've been getting, is more anecdotal. I don't have the real hard data yet, but there are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different things. And so knowing your district and what are some of those factors that you can identify, maybe through a committee or something like that as part of the first step. But I also think, and what we're beginning to see, is school districts adopting health curriculum and social emotional health curriculum. And I think the district here has also been looking at some of that. I think you looked at Castle. You looked at Castle, Chuck?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's a nice program. It's a good program. There are others out there as well. The key thing is what works for your system, and the other thing is getting people to buy into it, because it's a cultural change for everybody. Social emotional issues and problems are not just happening for kids with IEPs. It's happening in math classes, it's happening in science classes, it's happening everywhere. And so how you can decide how you're going to support the principals with regard to those issues before they're even referred for special ed is critical. Because right now, you're doing a pretty decent job of it. You're not over-identifying kids at all. You're below the state average in terms of the numbers of kids with disabilities. And if you don't address that problem head-on, it could be a problem down the road.
So do we have any more questions? Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, so next on the agenda is old business.
Okay, so you have in your packet, thank you, Mike, appreciate it. You have in your packet a proposed budget subcommittee schedule per our discussions in the fall and strategizing for the FY21 budget process. We talked about really hitting the ground running with regard to budget subcommittee meetings starting in the early fall, and kind of doing them a little bit differently in the sense of coming up with a thematic approach about what the pressing needs are for the district. So you can see a slate of, I believe we've got there 8 different meetings that speak to issues such as special education, transportation, athletics, technology, facilities, and the various programs at all 3 levels. And the vision, as we discussed last spring, is to kind of address 3 essential questions. First being, what is the vision of the program and how does it fit in with our master 5-year strategic plan? Secondly, what are the pressing needs for that specific program or services? And then what are the current and also projected budget drivers for that particular area? So for your consideration, I give you that proposed schedule. It is a little bit heavy on Tuesday evenings because I did look very carefully at the district's schedule as far as facilities and other activities and events that are going around. As we also discussed, I set them up in different locations all across the district with the mindset of having different venues that are varied but also could invite our various stakeholders to each of those meetings.
Looks good to me. I like the approach.
So Melissa left. I don't know if she's here. So this is going to be very important to communicate to the community. So we want to get a lot of participation in this list and all the thematic meetings that we can, just to get definitions down and get some facts out there to everybody about how the school district is spending the money and what we need money for, quite frankly.
And I would appeal to our CPAC members who are here this evening that the very first topic on Tuesday the 17th of September will be special education staffs. Just for your purposes, that's going to be Tuesday the 17th at 7 p.m. in the MISCO Faculty Lounge.
Very good. All right, next correspondence is the next on the agenda.
So you have in your packet just some official correspondence from the committee, should you choose to approve it. And it's just a simple request to our Teachers Association to commence, a formal request to commence the negotiations process for a successor contract. As you know, this is the last of a 3-year deal. As you also know, it is very, very early, it's extremely early in the school year. And I'm certain that they will have some organizational pieces, but per the discussion last spring, seeing the uncertainty around the budget process and so on, it would be highly advantageous to commence the process sooner rather than later.
So we need to vote on this, I would say.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and that way you can make it official and sign off on it.
Okay, so can I get a motion to accept this letter as something we want to send out to the teachers union part? No?
Oh, I make a motion that we approve the communication that's been crafted to enter into negotiations with the Mendon-Upton Regional Teachers Association.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. All right, next on the agenda, other matters not anticipated by the committee in 48 hours of posted meeting. Any other matters not anticipated? No, then moving on to future agenda items. What was that? Oh, okay. Future agenda items. Next, approval of 2019-2020 district action plans will happen on September 9th, and the superintendent's annual evaluation will happen on October 7th. That's it, right? All right. Anything else?
Do you want me to make the motion?
Please
Or is
do.
that a question? Okay.
I'm ready to bang you up. Yeah,
Hold on,
go
there's a
ahead.
question.
The executive session they're going into right now, it says MGL chapter 30A, section 21A. Can you explain what that means? I understand what executive session means, but what's the purpose of it?
Purpose is essentially to discuss personnel issues relative to the district.
Okay.
For various reasons, they have to remain within review of the school committee.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further?
All right, so I move that we enter executive session via roll call vote pursuant to Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21, subsection A, exemption number 1, and the committee will not return to open session.
Clear a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Lee Martin,
Aye.
aye.
Oh, yeah, we have to go by roll call? Oh, by roll call. Okay, by roll call.
Jill Dezetter, aye.
Carrie Lawrence, aye.
Sean Nicholson, aye.
Lee Martin, aye.
Lucas Kelly, aye.
Vicki Levinson, aye.
All right, very good. So the general session will adjourn, and we'll move on to the special session.